Okay. And then I'll turn it over to Chair Bellamy.
All right. Good evening, everyone. First, let me apologize. My Zoom window is saying Pastor Bellamy. I'm trying to change it to Brian, but please call me Brian. We call this meeting to order. It is 6:33. Please mute your microphone unless you are speaking. Any guests in attendance should introduce themselves in the chat, listing their organization affiliation, if any, and provide their contact information. To ensure that we have adequate time to hear from all commissioners, guests are asked not to speak during ACP meetings, with the exception of invited speakers. Though you are welcome to add your thoughts and comments in the chat, which we review actively. The minutes have been sent out from our last meeting. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes from October?
I second that motion.
All right. Well, will you offer?
Oh, I'll make a motion.
Okay, there we go.
My
I'll
apologies.
second the motion.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we accept the minutes. Ready for the question? All in favor say aye. Or raise your hands. Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. Excellent. All right. Let's keep it moving. All right. So to begin with tonight, we're going to hear from the subcommittee's recommendation on commission. Excuse me. We're going to hear from the subcommittee recommendation and commission discussion on public forums. Cherie sent out a very succinct email describing what our previous discussions have been and where we could potentially move going forward. So Cherie or any other member of the subcommittee, I don't know who's appointed, will you step up at this time to continue the discussion?
Yeah. Hi, how are you? How's everyone? So you're right, I sent out an email to basically recap, so because it's been a while. So here are the first part of the email is basically a short note that says, this is an email to recap. The second part of the email is the original plan that was submitted by Commissioner Gonzalez for outreach that quotes the relevant part of the county code. The third part of the email is a recap of our discussion from September. And I took that straight out of the minutes. That leads to the fourth part of the email, which is suggested topics. So basically, because of the things we've already done, it seems to me that we have the following decision points. One, to come up with two topics if we decide that we want to assign topics. So that's the first thing. Do we want to assign topics? And if so, what are those topics? I've listed 4 possible suggestions, not all inclusive by any means. Second decision point is to isolate 2 specific dates. Before we came up with a range, that range was October 24 through April 25th. So now I think we need to come up with specific dates. More importantly, we need to figure out whether what we want to do is to have those community sessions on the same days that we're scheduled to meet anyway, or whether we want to do something different. And then, let's see, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. And then we need to come up with 2 locations. Several, there's been some concern about having the outreach sessions in places that are most likely have the greatest involvement with police activity, and I put that in quotes. And that would basically be Silver Spring and Wheaton. So those are the sort of the areas as I see them. Susan indicates that Montgomery Village is also an area with high crime rates, but I think what we have not really decided is whether we want to go with the high crime rate, the police involvement issue, whether or not that we want that to be a factor. So anyway, I don't know if you want, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want me to go through, have discussion on each topic. Is that the way you'd like to proceed?
Yeah, I think we should go one step at the time. So perhaps let's talk about a time and then talk about a place and then talk about topics. But Eva has her hand up.
Yeah, I would just suggest I would put forward in terms of locations and logistics. I think since Silver Spring and Montgomery Village are areas with high police engagement, and we need to have these at like public facilities, it could be a great idea to have one at the Silver Spring Library and one at the Gaithersburg Library, because those are geographically different points of the county.
Mhm.
They're public accessible facilities. They're public transit accessible. They're walking accessible. I feel like those are really good locations to be able to get the most diverse sector possible of the community. And to further increase that accessibility, we could also offer a hybrid option, because I know a lot of folks, especially people without cars or like folks with various disabilities, like really appreciate having the hybrid option as well. That's just my
Eva,
2 cents.
Thank you, Eva. Pardon my ignorance. I haven't been to all of the libraries. Do the libraries there have like conference rooms or meeting rooms where we could hold such a meeting? Both of those libraries.
Yeah, both of them have meeting rooms that should hold at least like 30 to 50 people.
So then I guess our date would be contingent on when those facilities could, I guess we could come up with potential dates, but if we're talking about having a meeting during our scheduled meeting, that would be contingent on the availability of those spaces, right? So,
Yeah.
so it sounds like a great idea to me. Anyone have any other thoughts? So since it sounds like we're starting with venue, anyone have any other ideas or any other thoughts on venue?
No, I personally, I think those are really good suggestions. And it just kind of boils down to whether or not, we can get those dates. Comes to dates, are we talking about trying to do it on our regular meeting dates? Or is there an appetite to try for, a Saturday afternoon or whatever?
Okay, C. Arthur, I saw your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to throw in about the venue, say something about Montgomery Village. Montgomery Village is a large area. Not all of Montgomery Village. We need to figure out what isolated area of Montgomery Village that we need to concentrate on. I just want to throw that in if we use that as a venue.
So thank you. So do you recommend that rather than going to Gaithersburg Library, we go specifically to a place in the community where there is high engagement, like let's say an elementary school, like Stedwick Elementary School?
Yeah, where the area that where let's say the action is, you might say, if you want to put it that way, where the action, because Montgomery Village is a huge place. If you're on one end and you go to something up there, you might not get the crowd that you want to target.
Okay, Susan, we need your help. Where is the action?
My recollection off the top of my head is Cider Mill Apartments in Montgomery Village. But I'm going to defer to police, and if they don't know off the top of their heads, we can get back to you.
Cider Mill is right across from the library.
There you go.
Oh, it is. Okay, well, there, okay. Okay. So it sounds like we're aiming for the library spaces. So we have that nailed down. If let's say we're going to meet on a meeting date, that gives us then months to choose from, right? I would want to maybe not do December just so that we have some time, right? So maybe January for the first, and then we skip a month and go to March if we're trying to do it by April. What are your thoughts?
I think that's reasonable. You know, we don't want to rush ourselves, and so January or February, and the second one in April sounds good as well.
All right, where are we going first? Is there more? This sounds good.
Can we wait until we see what's available? You know, if we're talking about,
Yeah.
you know, how the space, see which space is available, and that, you know, let that be the determinant in where we go. So, or where we go first, rather.
I'll
Makes
look
sense.
at the meeting room availabilities right now, and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Can you also block it off, or do we have to call and file some paperwork? Right, yeah.
No, you can just reserve it.
Okay. So we can do that live in the meeting? The wonders of technology, okay. So if we can do that, that'll be great. That being the case, well, so Eva, while you look that up, do you want to go to topics, Cherie?
Sorry. Yeah, I think it would be help. I'm trying to keep notes on what you all are deciding so that I don't forget.
All right, so you know,
what,
we're saying January and March.
Right.
We have the
Okay.
Gaithersburg Library and we said the Wheaton or Silver Spring Library, right?
Silver
All right.
Spring Library.
Silver
Yeah,
Spring.
I have it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think topics is really what or you know, to be more open. I guess the first question is whether or not we want to do specific topics. Sort of have a y'all come, which I should say I think is always a bad idea. And if we decide not to do sort of an open y'all come kind of thing, then I think we should, you know, determine topics.
I like the idea.
And I should say the reason I think the general open forum is a bad idea is because what will happen is that, well, what can happen is that, you know, heaven forbid something happens the day before, you know, and nobody knows the facts. And so it becomes the whole meeting but nobody knows the facts yet, you know. So,
Right.
and you always have that possibility when you have a community meeting, and that's fine. But you know, if it's we don't know the facts yet situation, you can at least steer back to a specific topic.
Mhm.
So that's my 2 cents. But you know, folks should weigh in.
All right. Any thoughts?
I agree that we should agree on topics in advance.
All right. Is that the consensus?
I like the topic Cherie suggested of traffic enforcement concerns, because that's been a big legislative topic recently.
Mhm.
And complaint process and outcome data, I think, is also very good. Although it might be a little bit technical, folks might not necessarily turn out for that to the same extent.
Mhm.
But a meeting on like just overall like racial inequities
Mhm.
in policing, I think might be more compelling. And we can definitely have agenda items about the complaint process, since I know that that was a point of focus for the representatives of MCPD at the Freedom to Leave Act work session.
Right.
So, so let me just say that I agree with you that racial inequities is a good topic. But I think it could also be married with any of these topics, you know, like traffic enforcement and racial inequities. You know, they probably go hand in hand, you know, use of technology, body cam, traffic cameras, and, you know, whether or not there are racial equity considerations definitely go hand in hand. So I think, I think, you know, having given, well, I think the racial equity question should definitely be included. And my concern is that that too should be married to a specific topic, or else it just becomes sort of like an open-ended session where people are not necessarily trying to get to specific policy issues. And I think that kind of undermines our purpose.
Yeah,
So-
jumping off. Oh yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Eva.
Okay. Yeah, jumping off that, I do like the idea of pairing racial inequity with something like traffic enforcement. And then technology is also something I think people want to explore, especially with the expansion of the Drone as First Responder program. I know a lot of young folks have concerns about how the technology might be used, especially when it comes to, for instance, free speech demonstrations, protests, that sort of thing. Especially with the new presidential administration coming in. And so I think a listening session on the use of technology and like mass events could be something that I know a lot of young folks would turn out to.
All right. Christy and then C. Arthur.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. You know, given our tasking to advise the council, should we maybe ask the council if there are any particular topics that they've either been hearing about or would like us to focus on, just as one thought. And second thought, the last time we did a community meeting, which was now, you know, quite some time ago, we did try to focus on some traffic stuff, and there wasn't a whole lot of, you know, discussion. So I mean, we'd have to just really think about who we'd want to come talk at it and how we would want to frame it.
Okay. Thank you, Christy. C. Arthur.
We talk about pairing race with something. I'm thinking that what we haven't been talking about is youth and because that is how they dealt with it, how they see the issue, and then pair that with the different racial aspects of it and youth at the same together. I think that should be part of the program.
Okay, that sounds good. Cherie.
Christie's point made me ask what I thought, you know, I just assumed, but it's never a good idea to do that. Our previous community meeting, I don't, you know, my recollection is a little sketchy, but I'm not sure we had a presentation. You know, I think what we had was an open forum, if you will. And so to me, that sort of leaves the question, and that's the reason I put stuff about data and whatnot in here. Might be a little boring, but we would then have to have presentations. right? I mean, we would have to have the police, and if it comes to traffic enforcement, maybe we could have the ACLU. You know, I mean, we could have something that was informative and also participatory.
Yeah.
No, that sounds great. And I do want to remind you that we're planning 2 meetings, right? So are we going to have, I'm assuming we're going to have 2 different topics.
Right. And I don't know if
Right.
we have actually come to an agreement on either of them.
Right.
Well, at
So,
this point, let's plan for January, especially if we're going to have a presentation, right? Because we need to communicate with
Correct.
the presenters, right?
right. And we need to find, someone, I really think it's more interesting, especially if we're adding the racial equity piece, then, we should have someone from, the ACLU or, what is it called? Oh my goodness. The law enforcement group that did the consulting group that did the study for the county, LE4 something, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact name, but they could also, speak to that concern,
Okay. So
anyway.
in the interest of time, this is what I'm thinking. I think we do need to take action on a general topic tonight. And then because we need to have some motion before the December meeting, because then that just puts us a month out again, right? I think any refinement as far as the presenters and communicating with them, Cherie, we want to push back to the committee to be in communication the next couple of weeks to nail down and then bring information back to the council. What are your thoughts on moving in that direction, group?
That's fine with me. I mean, if that's fine with me.
All right. Any strong opposition? All right. So do we want to take an action tonight on a particular theme we're hearing? And let me just pull something up again. My notes. All right. So we're hearing traffic enforcement concerns paired with racial equity. Do we want to stay with that general theme and then have the subcommittee to find presenters and to send us more information via email?
And I think it would be helpful if Susan could find out from the police whether they would have availability during our whatever that day is in January when we normally meet, because somebody has to sort of be the
Right.
authoritative voice of what these traffic statistics mean and what the policy is.
So that's the second Monday in January. Susan, can we find out who can do that for us?
Sure.
All right. So, but just before we move toward an action, to Christy's point, do we want to send these plans to the council? And I don't know if we want to get their blessing or get their input.
I thought we wrote to them before and asked them, hey, is anything particular you want us to do? And their response basically was, not really. I mean, you all should just do what you want to do. I mean, that's a real shorthand. But if people look through their correspondence, I'm absolutely certain we wrote to them, and I'm pretty certain that their response was rather open-ended.
All right. So then, can we get a motion tonight that we will plan our first public meeting in January during our meeting time with the general topic of traffic enforcement concerns with regards to race and equity, and that we will empower the subcommittee to identify presenters in preparation for that meeting. That was a long motion, but did you all catch it? Do I need to say it again? All right. Do we have someone, will someone offer that motion? All right, we have
So
Eva.
moved. So moved.
All right,
Second
well,
motion.
I
all
second
right,
the
we just got to
motion.
make sure Cherie, okay, so we got Eva, we got Francisco for a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposition? All right. Eva, by the by, did you check in with the libraries or can you see if they have those dates available?
I put the link in the chat. For whatever reason, I'm not able to load it because the big meeting rooms are reserved through Active Montgomery. However, these meeting rooms are usually pretty available far in advance and often are not booked on Monday evenings. So if anyone else is able to try to load that site, that would be great.
So Susan, will you and Logan take that action to check out to make sure those rooms are available? And so wait, so if they're both available, do we want to start in Silver Spring or in Gaithersburg?
You know, I have some sensitivity to a lot of people believing that the county establishment, if you will, focuses too much on Silver Spring. You know? And so I don't believe that. I live in Silver Spring, but I think it would be a good way in to focus to start in Gaithersburg, quite frankly.
All right, Susan, will you look for, and Logan would look for January in Gaithersburg and then March for Silver Spring, please.
Yes.
All right.
Is that January 6th or is that the following? I just can't remember which.
It should be
13th.
the second Monday.
13th, sorry, thank you.
13th, yeah. So I just wanted to mention in the chat what Heidi noted. It kind of is connected to what Susan put in for the council response in terms of upcoming policies kind of hot off the press. So maybe since that might take more homework, maybe that could be for the next meeting, perhaps.
All right. Well, we have a new business section in the meeting. Teresa.
I'm sorry, say again?
I said we have a new, if you want to bring it up, a new business in a bit, that'll be
No,
fine.
Well, what I was referring to was the next community meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you talking about topics for the community meetings. I was looking at what Heidi had written and then what Susan had put down as I opened up that PDF file that Susan had noted from the
Okay.
council.
Topics? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ken, I just say that I think having sort of an overview for people of what the upcoming things are is a good idea. And I also think it's very likely between January and March, a lot of the council meetings may be very budgetarily focused.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I'd be a little hesitant to get people's hopes up. But it would be, I think it's a great idea for us to at least say to people, hey, look, this is coming up. Here is the way to contact us with your concerns about these things.
Absolutely. Terry, I don't have Heidi's PDF. You're muted.
It's not
Oh,
Heidi's.
Yeah, it's a PDF
Susan's.
from Susan. It was a council response.
Oh,
Is that right, Susan? It was a council response.
Yes.
okay.
And
Okay.
I just briefly read it, and one of the things they said was something about, policies. And then I looked at what Heidi had written, and it had the same buzzword, policies, right? And about, what Montgomery County is going to do in terms of work with that for the new federal immigration. So I don't know, maybe not be something that we want to talk about, and then I'm not saying for January, I'm saying for March in
Yeah.
terms of looking at topics. That's all.
All right. No, absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. All right, so thank you, Cherie and subcommittee. So we have pushed forth a motion and have our marching orders to prepare for our January meeting. Next on our agenda, we are happy to have Assistant Chief Darren Frankie. I believe I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Frankie, and he's here to share on Montgomery County Police Department's new consent search policy. Welcome, Assistant Chief.
Hi, Pastor. I'm Darren Frank. I'm the Assistant Chief of our Management Services Bureau. And
Brian is fine, Brian.
Brian. All right,
Yeah.
I'll try that.
Mhm.
So good evening, everyone. So I oversee the policy. Part of my portfolio involves a policy and planning division, which helps to write our policies and refine them as needed. Chief Yamada and Susan asked me to present tonight on the changes to our consent search policy and answer any questions for anyone. I guess what I will do is I will just give you a little bit of history under Chief Jones. Let me see if I can share here because it's probably easier to show some things. There it is. So let me click the right thing here and share. So you should be seeing what is our current policy. This policy went into effect on February 10th of 2023. And at the time, Chief Jones, if you tightened up the policy, if you would, on consent searches. And the way to tell where it was tightened, and if I'm scrolling too much, I'm going to the section that Chief Jones directed be tightened up. Well, first of all, let's say this: consent searches, there is no law requirement that we do or don't do a certain thing as far as documentation, as far as consent searches can be conducted completely through verbal consent. But Chief Jones decided at the time that he wanted to get more documentation, and certainly through the years we've been asked for more data on this topic. So what he did was, again, to keep the practice of consent searches going, because they are very important to what we do, especially when you talk about getting guns off the street and other types of situations. What we did was we changed it so that we directed officers that written consent was preferred, but they could still do verbal consent. But no matter what, they needed to record the consent and then record the consent on body-worn camera or audio, some sort of audio device. I will say, when I was a detective in the Major Crimes Division, I would go and do consent searches, reference different types of crimes, and I only had an audio recorder digital audio recorder at the time. Didn't have body-worn camera. That was a few years ago. But I would record it on that, so we kept that in there. Or mobile video, you could record it on mobile video. And then we directed that information was collected on our MCP 120, which documents the consent to search. So that's and this change was also born. I heard someone reference ELE 4A a little bit earlier. This change was born out of recommendations that they had. So that was the direction at the time. Since then, we had a couple different things go on in the county, and Chief Jones started again looking at the consent search policy, but of course he retired. Chief Yamada took over, and we continued to look at the consent search policy. And so what we've done now is we now have a new policy that will go into effect on December 2nd. when we write policy, there is a whole process that is involved in writing policy, and part of it, the first part of it is we rewrite it internally. The next part of it is we have executive review of it, and then the next part after that is it goes to the Fraternal Order of Police for a review, and then we discuss any issues involved, and then finally come to a final policy, which then, once everything's agreed to, takes 45 days to go into effect. That's outlined in our contract, or outlined in the contract for the FOP, which affects the vast majority of the department. So I'm going to stop sharing this particular screen unless anyone has questions on the policy that's about to go out of service. So I'm going to take that down and I'm going to put up what the new policy is. Let me get the right screen here. Okay. So you should be seeing a Word document now. So this that says draft on it. Oh, hopefully I didn't get too big there. I can go bigger. So this goes into effect December 2nd. It's agreed to by the chief, by the FOP, the county executive's office has been briefed on it. So as we go through this, the changes in bold are what has been altered in some way, or if some wording has been added to it.
Excuse me, Chief Frank, can you
Sure.
make it bigger, please? The older
Of course.
document was more visible. I just got new glasses. I'm sorry.
Tell me when.
That's good.
That's good. Okay. So a couple small changes. We added the reference to the U.S. Constitution because that's where the consent search is based in. This is just clarifying if the vehicle or real property or the person. Well, the person's easy. We know if we're searching a person, because, for example, we could ask for consent to get a buccal swab for DNA from somebody, or we could do a consent search like I used to do on an apartment or something where there's not really a need for a search warrant. We're with someone who wants to help the police and they just want to say, go ahead and come search this. And then the vehicle, which I think was was one of the main issues that came up, especially by Councilmember Jawando. This next change is a significant change. It's a higher standard for a consent search. It's a high standard for a consent search. It's directing that officers should have reasonable articulable suspicion to request one. And as we go through here, we'll show that we're asking the officers to write down what that reasonable articulable suspicion is. And then here, this is improving upon the last wording. Officers will record the advisement of the rights, the acknowledgement, and verbal disapproval on the body-worn camera system or the mobile video system. So everyone now, one of the changes here is every member of the department has a body-worn camera system. It's easier to use that device to record things. So now they will record this on one of those systems. This is probably the neatest part for us as we get into technology and we expand our use of it. We're getting into a point to collect data and to make things more efficient for officers, where we can collect things via digital forms. So when this came up, I worked with my team, and we had what's called a field interview report. Like when I come upon someone in the community and I want to record information about them for some reason, as I'm interacting with them, I would do it on we wanted a way to do it instead of paper, which can get lost and the information is hard to gather data from. You'd have to do a hand search to get data and collect things, or have a data entry person enter stuff. We had them create a field interview, a digital field interview application, and I asked them to add the consent search to it, because one of the big things about this is collecting data on what our officers are doing. And so between the video and the app, which are going to go hand in hand in the recording, we're going to have the person's rights, that they have the right to refuse a search written on the app, and they'll be showing it to the individual involved, and they'll also be saying it. It's not just going to be a read thing. And they advise which we had to do before, it was part of the training, but this is the most explicit stating of it. That we advise a person that they have the right to refuse a search based on consent, and then have them verbally acknowledge that they've been told, and they can also click on the app, that they've been told that they have the right to refuse the search, and then have them indicate again on video and on the app that they either decline or approve to the consent search. Now we did, to be clear, we did leave the MCP form 120 in effect. It's a paper form, and that's because you can't, there's always going to be a time when technology will go down. It'll be some ridiculous situation where you all saw over the summer, we had AT&T outages. We had, I don't think we had any, we might've had one Verizon outage, but something silly like that may happen. Very rare, but we always wanted to make sure, like, if we're in the most critical of situations, an officer just doesn't let things go because they didn't have the app. So they can still do that, but there's a high bar for them to explain why they used a form instead of doing the app. But again, it'll always be captured on the body-worn camera because they are required to do that, and there's no exception there. So you always have a recording of it. Including on this new process, the officer will clearly articulate the circumstances under which consent to search was requested and capture on the FI consent application at a minimum the incident type, the case report number, the subject's demographic data, a list of all property contraband data seized, and any other applicable data requested in the FI consent application. And this gives us some, I will tell you, one of the challenges over the last few years is you can grab a bunch of smart people, put them in a room and say, okay, what information do you want? What information do you want to grab? And a week later, someone comes in with a different idea. So the FI app gives us a opportunity to continue to morph as people ask us for different data points, but we've captured the most important ones here with this new policy. Now, the review part is the other very important part of this, and Chief Yamada has directed this after careful consideration. So right now, all of our use of force reports, all our uses of force are essentially investigated, reviewed. It's a high standard. When an officer uses force, they fill out a form, supervisors are notified, the sergeant reviews it, they review the body-worn camera, they review the reports, the executive then reviews the reports and reviews the body-worn camera, the commanders then review. So it's a high level of review, watching every single video. We're going to apply the same process to consent searches where consent is granted. The big thing that we're looking for is adherence. Number one, adherence with policy. And number two, make sure, it's been said before, it's counterintuitive that people would give away a right that they have, a right to refuse, that there must be something going on, that someone would allow a police officer to search their vehicle. So with this review, which is now going to be done, you're going to be able to look at the recording, which is captured, the form, which is captured, and the tone and the discussion and the words that play out in this conversation to get consent to search a person, a vehicle, a place, a bag, any of that. So all of that will be captured, and we can review and make sure that there's nothing going on that in violation of people's rights. So it's really a much higher standard now, and probably one of the highest standards in the country for our officers to do consent searches, effective December 2nd. Again, I want to be clear, December 2nd. And then, if anything, so that review needs to happen within 5 days. And then any issues go to the bureau chief, and then the bureau chief, I'm not going to have many of them. I don't oversee that many people doing stuff out in the field. But say the patrol services chief, like Assistant Chief Parker Lone, would get notified of any issues and then have discussion with the chief about if there needs to be an internal affairs investigation, or is this some sort of training issue. The important part is that the executive staff will review it and make recommendations. And this just goes into what they'll review, which is the body worn camera, the mobile video, and the application data, and any event reports. So that's the basic overview of the changes that are coming. Again, we do, we've talked to the state's attorneys, we've talked to a number of the council members, we've talked to the county executive, and we believe that this policy will number one, enable officers to continue to do work that they need to do in investigations, but also protect against unlawful searches and seizures. So with that, Brian, I will, took me a second. I will turn back over to you and the group for any questions. Oh, you're muted, sir.
All right. Thank you so much for your clear explication of the policy. We have Eva up first.
Yes, thank you so much for explaining that, running us through it, and letting us review it. I have two questions on two sort of different aspects of the policy. The first being, what accountability procedures are in place for officers who violate this policy or are seen to be using excessive amounts of consent searches? And two, I know you mentioned that you feel consent searches to be an important part of the law enforcement toolkit. And there's been, data from the county that reports the amount of weapons and contraband that have been seized in consent searches. Will that data continue to be collected? And if so, in what part of MCPD's policies is that stipulated?
So the policy dictates what data will be collected, and that'll be collected by the app. So again, going back, and then again, as we talk about other things that may come up, we can always add to the form. So if I go back up here, so subjects demographic data, list of all property, contraband data, any data seized, any other applicable data requested in the consent application, and then the case number, and the again, if an expression of they should be expressing what the reasonable articulable suspicion is for the request. So all that'll be collected, and it'll be collected digitally. So in the state of, and I think this next answer goes to both of your questions. So as far as number of consent searches, provided someone provided the officer is going through the reasonable articulable suspicion, which again is a higher standard than they need to, is going through the reasonable articulable suspicion and there's no red flags raising. We have officers that are more proactive in traffic stops or more proactive investigations. I mean, again, I've done a number of consent searches, has nothing to do with a traffic stop, as part of my investigative duties. There are officers that do a lot of traffic stops, and based on reason, and they make the traffic stop, and then for whatever reason they should have now, reasonable articulable suspicion, you would look at an individual that has a number of them, but this executive review is one of those things going into place that doesn't exist now, where they where an executive goes and looks at all of the data and the video that goes with it to ensure that that officer is not out there making excessive, unwarranted stops. So the officer's going to have to explain themselves. The other part of it is under the Police Accountability Act, police policy, violation of a police policy, which this is considered police misconduct. So if you have an allegation, whether it's internal or external, it would be reviewed, and any investigation into those complaints would go to the ACC for final determination after our internal affairs did the investigation. So that would be the other accountability piece, and what it would be a violation of policy. I don't have the uniform matrix, but let's say worst case scenario, you had someone violate it. ACC would confirm charges and make and say this is what they should be. This should be the punishment outcome.
All
Thank
right,
you. I would love to see that matrix if it's available as well.
All right. Eva, you said you had a second question?
No, that was both parts of my question.
All right. Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. I thought I had I'm having a lot of trouble with my internet tonight. So I've moved into a whole different room now. Hopefully that helps. Anyway, so I have two questions. First of all, so this policy will go into effect on December the 2nd. It seems to me that it will really affect traffic enforcement in a great way. And so I'm wondering if, sorry, I was trying to sign in on another thing. I'm wondering if we can get an explanation of this policy for our January public meeting. Whether someone could also come and speak to us about that, because I think that I think it would be helpful for people to know. That's number one. My second question is you mentioned field interviews, and so I'm assuming that field interviews have to do with stopping someone. I'm sorry, can you still hear me? That field interviews have to do with stopping someone who is not in a vehicle. This is maybe someone on foot.
Can be either.
So, okay, so I appreciate that. But I'm really interested in the whole field interview when stopping someone on foot. I think it would be good to get additional information from you all about the whole field interview process. Because I think we've asked about that a few years ago. And I don't think we got a lot of information on it. So that's my forward-looking information request.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and the other thing, I'm sorry, someone mentioned in the chat, and I think it's a great question about the form on the app. How many languages will that be in?
So we're looking to build out that, and we're at a minimum we're going to have English and Spanish. But the other aspect to remember that goes along with the translation, because that could be a concern, what is being said. That's where the recording of these encounters becomes important, number one. So if you get an officer, there's so many languages spoken in Montgomery County. It would be very difficult to do a form in every single language that you could run into in Montgomery County. We're going to look to grow as we go through this, the ones we need. But the most important aspect comes in. Darren Frank could go out and do a stop with someone that speaks German and have a German form, but it wouldn't make a lick of sense to me. And I'd do a terrible job at explaining it. That's why we would call an officer. Our first choice would be to call an officer that speaks German to the encounter, so that they can go through translating the form and giving effect to the words that are meant, which is then recorded, which then can be reviewed. That would be our number one. And number two, in the worst case scenario, we could call the language line, but I really don't think we're going to see that at all. But we do have resources where we could translate, but I don't, it would have to be an amazing critical situation for us to use a language line in this circumstance. What you'll see is officers that have a language capability called to a scene and translate the form, translate the app.
Right, I agree. I mean, I think logistically that would be extremely difficult. And so I'm wondering whether you're going to have English and Spanish, but we've got, as you said, we have people who speak a whole lot of different languages in this county. And so I'm wondering if there could be like another box that said like neither English nor Spanish is my first language. So that at least it would be indicated that maybe, people gave consent, but they really didn't, there wasn't a complete and full understanding of what that meant.
Sure. And I can talk to our training folks about that, about bringing that piece home. And even more importantly in that, when you talk about the review, let's say consent was granted and contraband was seized and it goes to court, we would have a hard time in front of John McCarthy defending a search that, when you translate it, when you look at it, when you look at the recording, was not executed very well. So it wouldn't bode well for us to do it that way, but I can certainly talk to my folks about training and emphasizing that aspect.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anyone
I have a question. I hope I can articulate this okay. To me, this entire policy hinges on reasonable, articulate suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out if there is a reasonable, articulate of suspicion, there is something else going on. If the consent is no to that particular situation, what steps does the police take to address this issue that they have a reasonable concern or suspicion about?
Well, we really don't have one. Once you've decided that you're not going to give up your constitutional right to a search, then what you fall back on would be you've documented this interaction. You have, and I guess it comes into play, like the ones that I used to deal with is like when you had a street robbery or something and you stopped individuals and they completely matched the lookout, but I mean the person that got robbed got their head cracked good, and they're not in condition to do an identification or something. And so at that point, we're recording on body worn camera. Someone may say, nope, you can't search my bag, you can't search my car, you can't search whatever it is. So we've got them on video. Because we've made the detention, right? Because in this instance, it is a detention. We're gathering as much data as we can. Then it would be up to investigators to go back to see if something can be done about the entire situation and drawn it there. But really, there is no once you've gotten to that point where someone says no, and there's no other reason to detain someone, then they get let go.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and this may help clarify some of the questions about reasonable, articulable suspicion. Could you explain what is the difference between that standard and probable cause?
So the way we do it normally is by percentages. It's probably easier it's not as easy to put a percentage to reasonable articulable suspicion. But when I was a detective, probable cause, you're about 75% of the way there. You know that someone did it. Now we always try to get higher than that, obviously, because you need 100% there for court. But probable cause is generally about 75% there. You know there was a crime committed. You know this person committed the crime, and you're trying to gather more information. Obviously, it's a lower standard than what you have in court, what you have to prove there, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. Reasonable articulable suspicion is basically a set of facts based on the circumstances at play, based on the officer's training. For example, I'm a midnight officer. I'm in my business district. I see a car driving slowly, stopped in front of a Verizon store, looking around. I see someone in a mask. They see me. They drive off. I know that burglaries are done in the middle of the night at Verizon stores, and we've had a trend. And so I'm going to go stop this car. That would be my reasonable articulable suspicion that it's potential this individual was about to commit a burglary. It's basically a set of circumstances that would lead a reasonable officer to believe that they should investigate what's going on further. Hopefully that helped. Been a while since I was teaching.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And so maybe another a subsequent question is, so can you explain, if you can, the difference between the new standard and the old standard?
The old standard, the new standard, we're putting in specifically that they should be articulating reasonable articulable suspicion for these stops. Way back when people could, and this was one of the things that rightfully people were upset about. People could go fishing, and I'm talking way back because our training has evolved through the years. Officers could go fishing and just every car out of a neighborhood, just stop it and start talking to people and we're discouraging that kind of behavior, right? But putting it in writing that you need to have reasonable articulable suspicion. Again, so I'll go back to my previous answer about policy and about accountability. By putting this in the policy, it brings accountability to that standard of having to articulate the reasonable articulable suspicion, and so that violations of that can be held more easy. It's not to say we couldn't hold them accountable before, but it gets even clearer for officers. It's a very clear message of the standard that is expected of them. And there's repercussions through the ACC for not following that standard.
All right. Thank you. John, do you still have a question?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah, good, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I think you answered it just now. I wanted to know if it was required, say I get pulled over and I ask, okay, what's your suspicion that why am I being pulled over? By law, do they have to tell me what that is, or they could say it's just part of my investigation, hold tight? So I think he said
Well,
they have to do that.
well, any interaction with a citizen based on a detention of this nature, I mean, this is one of the important things, and I've talked about this before about what I teach my daughters about their constitutional rights, which is they're protected. Their people have very smart people have wrote these things, and we should take advantage of them. And so, what I would say to that, and there's an education piece on this for everyone, is you have a constitutional right. You can ask a police officer why they stopped, and if they get into shenanigans, again, the beauty of it, it's being recorded, and you can go about making a complaint. I should be able to tell you. I should be able to tell you why I'm stopping, and it's a quick statement, right? Just the example I gave right now. The reason I'm stopping you is because we've had burglaries in this area. It's 2 a.m. in the morning, and you're out driving around slowly in front of the Verizon store, just trying to see what's going on here. Yes, you can certainly ask, and I would get number one, I would get suspicious if an officer didn't tell you, and number two is, I think everyone needs to know their constitutional rights. At that point, you say, okay, well, you're not searching my car, so you don't need to ask.
Great, that was perfect. That I think you answered it twice there. I do appreciate that. Thank you so much.
No problem, sir.
Can I ask you one other thing?
Sure.
If I'm riding down the street and my back light, brake light doesn't come on when I stop,
Mhm.
you stop me, and you do what police do, ask me for my identification, all that kind of stuff, driver's license.
Mhm.
And so if nothing else is going on with me, and you ask me, can you do a consent search, but you don't have you can't do that, right? Is that correct when you're talking about reasonable articulated
Yeah,
suspicion?
you should not be fishing like that. You should not do that.
That should not happen in Montgomery County at this point.
Correct. There would only be some extraordinary situation, but we can't really think of it. There's a should in the policy. Because again, one of the problems we have is thinking of every possible situation.
Yeah.
But
But
what you described
Go
right
ahead.
there. I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, what you described right there is a violation of the policy. We're not fishing for taillights out to go fishing for whatever. I mean, it's now what I will say is, if your tail lights out, it's a stop. I will tell you a number of traffic or DWI arrests are made out of lights out and things like that, right? But that's a different kind of interaction. That's me pulling you over and coming up and smelling the odor of alcoholic beverage in the passenger compartment, and that's a whole different interaction. So I want to make sure I'm clear on that. Like, people will get pulled over for busted tail lights and not driving with their headlights, because we do have officers out looking for individuals that are intoxicated. But just to ask for a search of a vehicle off of a broken tail light, there's got to be something. It's got to be thicker than that.
Thank you.
All right, so Chief Frank, I want to throw one more question in there. First, I want to say that I'm absolutely fascinated at the usage of apps for this process. I'm reminded of the early 2010s iPhone commercial. There's an app for that. And so,
That's right. Finally.
Right.
They've been talking about us being paperless since 2002. So anyway, yes, sir.
I believe it. I believe it. So I'm assuming every officer has this app
Yes.
and is training how to use it, right? So you kind of mentioned this. There's always the potential and inevitable probability that technology will fail.
Yes.
And can you just go back again? The phone's battery dies for whatever reason, or there's a malfunction. What is the backup procedure?
They would fill out what we currently have is the MCP form 120, the consent to search request, which also captures the data. It's a paper form. They would fill that out, but the protection against, I do like the word shenanigans. The protection against shenanigans, like, is that you're going to be recording. You must record on body worn camera, and there's really no excuse for that. I actually don't have my body worn camera on right now because I'm in my basement, but the body worn camera system is very robust, and we don't have issues. The only issues we have are when cameras get lost because someone's in a tussle, or people just aren't operating it the way they should and aren't following their training, which is a whole nother violation and of a different policy and a problem altogether with that.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Well, Chief Frank, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing the new policy with us. And we have given, I guess, some notes, especially from Cherie or Ms. Branson. But we are grateful for your time. Please give our regards to the chief. We have one other question from Christina.
Okay.
Yes. Hi, good evening. I just wanted to know, have you presented this information to the public in any context? And I'm asking that because Cherie did ask about having this information presented to the public at our public meeting, but that will be before this goes into effect. And so I just wanted to get a vibe or feel for how realistic that is, if you all have already done that, if you're prepared for that. Yeah.
So we generally do not. So first of all, this is a forward-facing policy, so it would be a policy on our website. You bring up you could bring up a really great point as we continue to move forward in this evolution of law enforcement. I can ask Chief Yamada if he would want to do a news release that we're changing our policy about this in advance. So I can certainly ask if he'd like to do something. He's expressed before that he wants transparency and openness. So I can ask.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I appreciate the openness to be so transparent. So thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Very good. We are moving on. We are now upon new business. Before we open the floor, Christina, is your hand still up from your previous question? Okay.
Not anymore. Thank you.
All right. So before we open the floor for new business, there is a new bill to be introduced tomorrow, which we need to review for comment. It is on the U visa, which is an immigration visa for people who have been victims of crime and or aid police in investigations. All right. We need to discuss this. Would anyone like to open up?
I gotta be honest, I found this policy quite dense and difficult to understand. From my understanding, it appears that the policy is essentially a commitment that Montgomery County will not do anything stricter than what the federal government is doing to enforce or like people with U visas, but I would appreciate clarity on that.
Could I jump in on that?
Sure.
The police department currently has a policy that it won't investigate these types of crimes that are older than 10 years. And the bill would change that just to comport with whatever federal law is. So it would eliminate that limitation if it doesn't comport with federal law. And Captain Satinsky can jump in on this as well. I believe the U visa is something that's available for people who have been victims of crime and are helping the police department investigate certain crimes.
Susan, that's correct. That's exactly what it is. It's not like the regular visa you think about when traveling. It's all about being a victim of a crime and that caveat of assisting law enforcement in throughout the investigation.
All right, so do we have any comments for the council?
Hi.
Yes, sir.
I in as much as I can understand the draft bill, it makes sense because it makes sure that the standard, in other words, that the 10-year minimum is at least it's not shorter than what the federal government requires. So in that sense, I think it's a positive step. It may be helpful if we ask someone who is proposing the bill to explain and answer the questions that we may have. And at the same time, it might be also helpful to have someone who someone from the police to explain their perspective on the proposed bill as well.
Well, from the police department side, Francisco, just to answer your question, we can't comment on it at this time until the county executive's office is weighed in because we work for the executive branch. So until the CE weighs in, we don't have a opinion one way or the other. I can tell you the 10-year caveat came in probably about 10 years ago, and part of it was dealing with our access to information because we couldn't go back past 10 years and we were technologically limited, so we couldn't verify certain things. And there were also some process things that came into play with that as well. Being able to verify that actually the crime occurred, we couldn't do that. Were they actually helpful? We couldn't do that. So that's kind of where that came from. And we aren't the only agency with this limitation. There are many agencies across the country with it. The Homeland Security, who sets this up, the U visa, the T visa, and I think there's a S visa as well. Will all fall into this in different silos. They set it up for a national model as wide as possible, and then agencies can either do it. They can actually either do this program or say they're not going to do it. We're not forced to do it. And then they can put parameters on it based on their technological abilities or just their process abilities or how much work they can actually handle.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
You're welcome.
Cherie?
Questions. When does the council want us to get back with whatever our considerations may be?
Think you luck out because it's going to take a while to go to a public hearing, and I believe it won't go to committee until after recess.
Right. So I think we would. I really need to read this and look at what the federal law might be because they appear to roll hand in hand. So I would suggest that maybe we weigh in on this in our next meeting after we've all had a chance to really digest this, because this seems to me to be kind of big. And then and so here's my other question. And this is to the police. What would be the practical effect if the law was not changed? What practical effect would this have on your daily enforcement activity?
This has nothing to do with enforcement. This is entirely about victims and victim services. There's no enforcement aspect to it.
But what would be the practical effect on victim services if this was not changed?
Well, if it's not changed, then Ms. Branson, we'd have status quo as to where we are now, because that's what without the change.
And status quo means what? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how many people are really affected by this. I'm trying to get some understanding of the scope of this.
So it varies. I used to do these a long time ago, and we get sometimes 10 a month, sometimes 15 to 25. It just really depends on the person, because the victim has to apply for it. The police department doesn't seek these people out. The victim would apply for it. They send paperwork to us for review. If it meets the parameters as we have set forth in our policy, we sign off. And this is just a gateway. We don't actually give this visa out. This is a gateway to go to Homeland Security, to where then they have I think it's 2 or 4 years to go through this process. And there's a limited number of U visas and T visas that are given out each year. So they may not even get it, even with our signing off.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
All right. And so it sounds like we're going to review the policy further in preparation for comment for the council. All right.
Can I ask, can I ask you this about that?
Absolutely.
Should should we let the public hearing go forward before we comment on it, so we have more both sides of the issue of the bill? And then we come back and bring it to the council to have comments on?
I push it back to the group. What say you?
Yeah, my opinion is that that, you know, I'm not sure this is really a public hearing kind of thing. I mean, visas and immigration law are incredibly complex. And frankly, people who may be affected by this U visa thing may not want to really speak on this at a public hearing, you know, because it does kind of imply that I'm here because, you know, I was a victim of a crime. I'm helping the police. Yeah, that might not be something people want to talk about. So, so I don't know how, from a practical matter, you know, as a practical matter, I don't know how helpful public input would really elucidate our examination of it.
I have another comment to make about that, because I think it's not so much to me that the people who might be affected by this, there will be people who are representative of these people who will weigh in on the practicality of it or the effect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I if I may speak, I agree that this is a complex issue. I don't think we have, and I don't think that there's an immediate deadline. So this is the kind of issue that maybe we can review and revisit, and then Susan, perhaps you can let us know in terms of what kind of time frame would be good for us to provide our advice to the council in order for it to be useful and effective.
I think tentatively, if you could aim for mid-January. I don't think the public hearing is going to be until the council gets back from recess. But I can find a firm date for you and send it out by email.
Great. And maybe we can all review or take a look at the draft bill, do our own research, and maybe have a follow-up discussion at our December meeting and see if we have something that would be helpful to the county council.
Speaking of your December meeting, I believe that's the third, no, is it the third or the fourth training, but it's in person.
Fourth and final.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just wanted to put that out there.
All right. Which training is this one?
Logan, do you remember? Is it
It's the box drill and I think Milo. A lot of the
LiDAR
hands-on demonstrations, yeah.
So will we have opportunity to have the training and the meeting?
The training is during the meeting, it's in person. Whether or not you'll have additional time to discuss other topics, we'll have to find out a better idea of how much time the training will take.
Okay, so to Francisco's point, can we just keep this as a high priority agenda item? So that if we do have time, or if we have to communicate in between meetings, we can do that.
Yes, or you can assign it to a subcommittee too.
Let's do that. All right, so can we get a volunteer of, okay, so Christina.
Oh, no, not volunteering.
Okay.
I was gonna say, because as Sherry said, like, immigration law and this particular document is dense, as Eva even said, right? So we can all read it, and still walk away with very little full information, very, like, not informed enough to make any type of real input, just because of the topic, it's just dense topic in general. So I was gonna make a suggestion before the actual committee, that maybe if there is a member, a commissioner here that has a particular or is keen to immigration law, that can synthesize this information to provide it to us in a way that we can all understand, then we can go away from that meeting a bit more informed, and have something that when we do look at it as people who are not immigration people, we have some synthesized information in our mind that we can apply to it. Therefore, we're reading something that's truly informing us, right? And then when we come back to the following meeting, making this a high level agenda item, then we will be able to truly discuss this in a real way. And then maybe we can determine if it's necessary to have a subcommittee to create the things we'd like to present to council, or if at that point we're able to discuss it as a group.
All right, do we have such a one on the committee as Christina described?
Well, I'm not an expert on visas, particularly this kind of very esoteric visas. I have a long time ago issued visas. In my professional career. I'd be willing to give it a shot and take a look at it. It would be helpful if there was a lawyer among us, or someone who is, that would be very helpful if I could take a stab at doing exactly what Christina suggested, and then
and had a lawyer for reference.
Yeah,
Christina, aren't you a lawyer?
I am, but this is not my area. And so I just wouldn't be comfortable providing any type of legal input on this particular area.
All right. And Cherie, you are a lawyer. Do we have any other attorneys?
And ditto, that's why I know that immigration law is incredibly complex. And I used to do Homeland Security stuff. So, the best thing you can do is know when you should not do anything. And, so now I'm a girl. Nope.
All right. So, yes.
I see that Susan offered to provide a second set of eyes.
Okay, that will be great. All right. I was just thinking, if this is a bill that the council is offering, isn't there someone from the council or who works for one of the council persons who could break down, I guess whoever's introducing it, would they have the capacity to break it down for us?
I can ask the attorney who wrote the bill whether or not she has some time to talk to a subcommittee.
That would be great.
Okay.
Okay. So Francisco, you're heading this subcommittee, will you please?
Okay.
All right, we need at least 2 more, please. All right, thank you, C. Arthur. 1 more. Is there anyone here who has not yet served on a subcommittee? All right, Francisco and C. Arthur, and working with Susan and in connection with the attorney who helped to draft the bill, please get us very scholarly cliff notes of what we need to know so that we can give an informed comment to the comments to the council. Thank you so much. Is there any other new business? Is there anything in the chat?
This is not new business, but I do want to note that Susan shared with us some very good information on crime statistics for 2023. I have yet to go through the whole thing, but I think it was very helpful, and I look forward to going both through the testimony and through the reports very carefully.
All right, ditto. All right. Okay. Well, at this point, we can will someone offer a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn from Christina, a second from several of you. We'll take Cherise at 8:03. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 All opposed, you're welcome to hang out in the Zoom room. All right.
Have a good night.
Thank you,
Have a good
everybody.
night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you very much.
You too.
Night.
Thank you.